evening. We're here to convene the April Police Advisory Commission meeting. I think that the plan is that we'll go through the first limited items on our agenda, and then we will ask our guests to speak. They're here to speak about the taser use in the Philadelphia Police Department. Excuse me. Oh, I'm sorry. Kelvin's going to report on the delay of the minutes.
Yes. Unfortunately, the minutes were not prepared in time for tonight's meeting. Please excuse my lapse on that, and I'll have this for you probably in a day or so before the next meeting.
Great. So,
yeah, we have, just for purposes of future meetings, May 16th, June 20th, July 17th. We'll keep everybody advised if we have any changes as we come up on the summer months. Calvin, I know Commissioner Geffen needs a copy of the memo.
No problem.
oh, sorry, Ben. I was like, which thing do you want? I got it. Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay.
That would be it, yes.
All right. So, with the permission of the other commissioners, we'll ask our guests to speak first. Okay. So please.
Where's right here is fine? Fine
you're
for me.
fine there.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Do you want to just introduce yourself?
No, sure, absolutely. And my name is John McElharney, and I appreciate the invitation to be here today. Thank you, Kelvin. I don't know, we've known each other the past 10 plus years at least, or no, longer, 12, 15 years. And Kelvin was at the inception of the CIT program, which is going to be a topic here today. And we were co-presenters all those years ago when that program was rolled out. And it's important that we kind of revisit how that all happened here today a bit, and where we are now after some decisions that were made changes to that program, and actually the attendees. So a little bit of background. I spent 12, 15 years providing de-escalation, crisis intervention, and training for police officers throughout the state of Pennsylvania. And for probably, I think, over 2,500 Philadelphia police officers and supervisors over 12 years, if I'm remembering correctly. And I'm very used to relying on a PowerPoint, as a big crutch. So this is where I am today, so I'll be looking at my scratching notes here. And that training for de-escalation, we'll just shorten it to that, involved the signs and symptoms of mental disorders, resources for officers who could, instead of arrest, someone needs assistance, this is where we can send that person, or we can refer their family to some other services. And of course, obviously, to understand de-escalation in a crisis situation, with or without, symptoms of a mental illness, but they could recognize that when they were present, and keep themselves safe, and those folks as well who needed the assistance, and then families could rely on that, and they would have that training. We all benefit. The officers benefit, and we as citizens benefit from that. So I did that for 12 plus years here at the city of Philadelphia. In fact, right down the hall at the advanced training unit until they finally got their new academy, which they desperately needed. And that really helps, that the environment of training helps all of us better to learn. I have to say about the officers I've met since, I guess, 2001, 2002, they're just terrific. I mean, they really are dedicated to trying to do the best for everybody in the situation and keep themselves safe. And we all learn, because I didn't do this alone. We had many partners in the community agencies and with the Office of Mental Health and other departments. But they taught us so much over the years about police work and the realities. So we got better and better at presenting, and we actually presented this course I'm going to talk about a bit that led to the CIT program with instructors of the advanced training unit. So that was important to do and establish those relationships. That's all about what it's about, because now we want to keep that trust building and build it more with the community and partners, and that's what we need to do, work together. There was BH10, Behavioral Training Education Network, and CST, Consumer Satisfaction Team, and they provided, there were two speakers mainly who spoke at every one of our trainings, and again, 2,500 officers overall, and supervisors and patrol officers over a period of years, from 2003, well, then dropped off 2011, 2012. But they spoke at every session as a volunteer from their full-time job, that consumer satisfaction team. And remember, the term was consumer, right? And I mean, that was in vogue then, and you'll see that if you see our agendas, but now it is a person, right, who may have a serious mental illness, and they would come in and talk about their personal experience. And I'll tell you, the officers really got invested in that, and that was a key to the success of the program. So, a little bit of background. In 1999, I think we probably all remember advocates, and they've continued, thank goodness, advocating for police training around issues of crisis intervention and de-escalation. And in 1999, then Lieutenant Cochran of the Memphis Police Department, and he's the one who put together and developed the Memphis model of CIT, and the key there is what? It's the volunteer select officer. That's who you want. The officer who's personally invested in this particular issue, and they want to go forward and get that CIT training and help out citizens and their fellow officers. And that's what Memphis model is all about, and that's what the Philadelphia CIT program is and was based on when it was developed, and still should be. And then in 2000, we remember we had that horrific Amtrak shooting, and this again was something that the advocates could point to, and Amtrak was very.
This is the shooting in the 36th
In the train station, there was a man who was receiving services. You know how it is. We all know this individual from where we work. You know, may be having some issues on a given day, and unfortunately, he was. I guess what really happened there is he was knocking some trays of food over and things, and Amtrak police, called to their attention that he's causing a disturbance. And unfortunately, I think what happened, it appears that this gentleman fell back into a corner up against a wall, and then officers trying to protect themselves, but also get him into custody as quickly as they could, which is something we train that you don't have to, right? If you don't have to protect yourself, step back, take your time. Unfortunately, this man did try. He swung a chair at an officer, and that's a deadly weapon, and then it resulted in the shooting by the officers of that man. That's not to say that when that chair was swung that it was wrong for the officers to fire. They needed to protect themselves at that point. The whole point of de-escalation is to recognize the situation beforehand and do what? Not get in too close. Try to de-escalate and step back if you can, but always be ready. They have to protect themselves. Once the officers understood where we were coming from as a group of trainers in the class, from police safety and recognizing that, but giving them tools to be safer and then to have better outcomes and not have people come back around again who could make services useful to them and become well. It was great to have that kind of mutual respect, which we developed. Then, right around that same time, out came Directive 136, if you recall. There was an old directive. All the police departments had a policy or directive around the nation called EDPs, right? Emotionally disturbed persons. Well, that's pretty broad. I can be an EDP at any time, right? All of us can, right? What is that, right? What does that mean, right? And really what they were talking about or applying it to was someone who may have, what? Symptoms of a mental illness, right? And showing those signs. Well, that's something very specific, and you need to know what they are. You need to know what those certain symptoms may be and how to respond to those or not, so you don't, escalate. And you can hopefully de-escalate and everybody is safe. And use of force, taser use, or any other use of force is not required. They came up with Directive 136 in July 2000. It's still in force, as far as I know. It was when I left in 2014. And the title of that was changed from EDP, a whole new policy, but based on the EDP, but of a severely mentally disabled person. I was on the committee, one of many, okay, to review the directive. And the point was, look, if you're going to be talking about folks who may need services in our mental health system, behavioral health, those terms are all mental disorders, let's use the terms, the officers, get them used to using the terms that they're going to run into when they take me into the crisis center, if I need assistance. Let's use severely mentally disabled person. What is that, right? Well, any of us, that's what it means. So now they're on the same language. So Directive 136 really took the core of CIT that Lieutenant Cochran was talking about, and the advocates wanted. Time is not of the essence. Most people with mental illness are not more dangerous than someone else. Take medications, along with you to the hospital. Try to refer them, slow things down, and ask questions. Right? Someone who's very ill can ask questions if there's trust and they're not escalated, from the environment. That sometimes we all get a little bit nervous, right, with the police cars behind us or that kind of thing, or we'll get stopped for speeding or whatever it might be. It's natural, but someone who has serious mental illness symptoms at that time, it can make the symptoms worse, and it can escalate obviously to that use of force and tasers and whatever else may come into play. So the advocates continued then because still we're not getting acceptance of the CIT program through the police department or with the police department. And I have to say Commissioner Johnson was really the one to get the ball rolling in my recollection and memory. In fact, as early when he was a deputy commissioner and head of the Dignitary Protection Unit, he invited us in to do one of our first trainings together, BH10 and FTAC. I was with FTAC, PMHCC organization under that umbrella, and he was just fantastic. So what ended up happening was in January 2003, so now we go from 99, right, 2000, Directive 136, and still advocating, right, training, and certainly the CIT, the Memphis model. So the police agreed in 2003, January, to vet a course that was developed actually with the police department then, obviously, with the Office of Mental Health, that would, and the police department invited us in to do it and knew the value of it, to educate their supervisors on Directive 136 and on signs and symptoms and de-escalation, because 136 would call a supervisor whenever they suspected someone might be in crisis, and particularly with a serious mental illness. And then supervisors would have that level of responsibility, so they needed extra training. So they allowed us in to do a 3-hour training, which was terrific, with BH10, Consumer Satisfaction Team. So we had 2009, January of 2003, we started that 3-hour class right here in the Advanced Training Unit with the Advanced Training Unit instructors for all supervisors. And it was really 136 heavy, but that was great, from the side of Office of Mental Health and all of us in the agencies. Because why? That's the core of CIT, right? Take the time, slow things down, understand what you may or may not be seeing, and how to deal with that, and avoid the use of force. So those continued all the way up and through the end of December 2005, so 2003 to 2005. And in March 2005, those supervisor classes had been received so well, and we had developed such a relationship with the officers and such good feedback that the department agreed to have a 6-hour, so it'd be an 8-hour day, 6-hour course with case scenarios now in the afternoon and all those kind of things, with the Advanced Training Unit instructors, beginning in March of 2005, so it'd be 6 hours of training, 8-hour day. And it was a result of this relationship. And these supervisors, I'll tell you, when we first went in, maybe a funny story about how we got a little bit of that buy-in, and that's what you really need. The officers have to respect, as we all do. Somebody comes in to tell us what we think is how to do our job better, right? And police officers are very discerning, and they need to be. They're in the public eye. I mean, I'm not, in our jobs, if we can still have that reaction. I would always start off by saying, look, well, I'm one of the few lawyers in the world, I have to admit that. I hope we can get over that hurdle. And so therefore I know everything there is to know about police training. Well, no, you don't. So we got great discussions going amongst themselves and each other. And the best compliment I ever had was a supervisor came up, a sergeant, and he said, look, I didn't think this had any value, I didn't want to be here. But you know what? Every officer should have this. And the biggest thing I take away from this, not all lawyers are assholes. And I thought, okay, and that was in big, all caps in the back of the eval. I've kept that one, okay, a copy of that. But that was the reality of what? Okay, this makes sense to us. It's from an officer safety perspective. We can use this and keep other folks safe. But it's instructive because we ended up then finally getting to the CIT program in January of 2007. All right, so and at this point we've had already thousands, come through the officers and supervisors. And now January 2007 we had the CIT program. But that sergeant's comment says everything we really need to know. The sergeant took value in the training, take that out with him, right, and model it. That was the whole point, right? But also that supervisor saying, look, other officers would find this of value. Now CIT really wasn't, this was in 2004, so 2007, the CIT program. But that officer, that sergeant would not be interested in what? Volunteering for the 35 hours week-long of CIT training to be certified, because why? That's not a special interest of that person, right? Personally in the profession. But that's terrific, because they got what they needed. They know it's of value, but they know other officers might actually, in the future, want to go into a CIT program. So that's the importance of having volunteers who you want as a CIT officer to be there for us when we call, and for their fellow officers as a resource. So that continued all the way through, again, until the CIT came in January 2007, and the Philly was well advanced at that point, because now we had the CIT program, Volunteer Memphis Model, but we continued the 6-hour Enhancing Safety course, is what we'll call it for short. The 6-hour program we presented with the Advanced Training Unit was called Enhancing Citizen and Officer Safety, Law Enforcement Behavioral Health Partnership. That's why we call it Enhancing Safety. The police call it Behavioral Health Training. That's fine. So we continued that concurrently. Because why? CIT was to be what? Volunteer select officers. That's how it was rolled out. We did the presentation with the police department. That's the founding principles of the program, all the press reports, press releases, all the way up through in 2011, as far as I know, and beyond, that it was a volunteer program, and that was the value of it. So you would have every officer receiving what? 6 hours de-escalation, knowing resources, knowing how to be safe, knowing that they could volunteer for a CIT program if they had that interest, or that what? They're to call upon CIT officer if they're available to help them out, because, oh, we have a situation where that CIT officer has some training that may come in value here and help us to get this resolved safely and to where this individual needs to go. And that's how it worked for years, from 2005 through sometime beginning of 2011. We did concurrent 6-hour sessions, probably once a month, on every fat day that was available, when all officers were available, to call it the heavy day. And then once a month for 1 week would be the CIT all-week training for those volunteer officers. And what the Enhancing Training Safety did, the 6-hour course, it provided a pool of officers who wanted to volunteer, because that was part of the program. Hey, we have a CIT program now. If you want to volunteer, put down your information, and we can be in contact with you, and then we'll build our classes. And that's how we would, out of every class, if we had 30-some folks or 20-some officers, you might have 1 or 2 officers, or 4 or 5 or 6 who said they would start talking in class. My son, my daughter, my father, we had these issues. And it's really neat. I mean, that's a level of trust, right, with folks who were not officers. So they had great discussions, and they went on to volunteer for the CIT program. So when people see the pin, right, and we're told to call 911, ask for a CIT officer, or ask an officer at the scene for a CIT officer. You saw the pin, or other officers, it was like, hey, I have an issue, or can you help me? And I know you have that special interest in that additional training and certification. And it was Directive 136, it was still very much based upon that, but the de-escalation course. And the kind of neat thing is that when the DOJ COPS report started coming out 2012, 2013 for other major cities, Seattle, and other cities, and then recently here in Philly, they actually talked about every officer, patrol officer, supervisor, should have a 6-hour course in de-escalation. And it was really mirrored all of our learning objectives. It was a mirror. We were well advanced, and it's kind of neat to see that. And PERF, Police Executive Research Forum, just came out in January 2016 of this year with the 30 guidelines of de-escalation, what departments should do, and they state a preference for the volunteer CIT program, and then again separate training for all officers, in those principles. But the core here would be the volunteer aspect of CIT program. So, and the last one that we did, we also were invited then to do all pre-promotional training. So if officers were going from corporals and sergeants, up to lieutenants and captains, we would be called in and do all those classes as part of that training. The last one we did of that, although training in general had fallen way off in 2012, was in January of 2014, 148 supervisors. It was a great experience. We were doing good work. What happened, unfortunately, in 2011 or 2010 at some point, and I just learned this happened by happenstance, really. I continued to do the trainings when we would be asked to, but they had fallen off. Didn't really know why. We're on committees and things, but didn't hear anything. And I was still the first day speaker for the CIT week, each week. Kind of a little bridge there, and then develop it some more. And so what happened apparently, and I found out, was that the police department, the administration, I only learned this in July of 2012, that they had decided that any and all officer who chose, right, to carry a taser and be qualified for a taser and receive taser as a weapon training, it was mandatory now that they also, before that as pre-qualification, attend the 35-hour CIT program. And then after that, they could sit for the, I think it's 6 hours of the taser as a weapon training program. And that's an important point, because I think you'll hear from maybe the police department that it's still voluntary because the officers are volunteering for a taser. That's a problem, in my opinion and experience. The Fed said stop conflating the two, right? And thanks to Brian Williams, everybody's conflating this and that. But in other words, taser is a weapon, right? And it should be taught as a weapon, and you should, along with that, have de-escalation training. That's fine. But the CIT program is wholly different. It should be a voluntary program for all the reasons we just discussed. Two very separate things, and don't put those two together so that officers only think maybe of CIT as a taser rather than this is someone who could help.
Is that the suggestion, that because they conflated the two issues, that folks only took the CIT if they wanted to use a taser?
That is exactly the point, that this putting these two together, because if you hear the police department, they talk about now as Philadelphia taser training is 40 hours. Well, that's the 34-35 CIT, and then there's 6 or so of the taser as a weapon. But that's CIT, and then right, and they're together. So that's the exact point, which is the decision was not to make tasers only available to CIT certified officers. Now, when tasers, we'll just say tasers, ECWs, right? Right, but tasers, when they were first available way back, right, 2002, 2003, 2004, they were very scarce, right, and very limited availability and cost and availability to the department. So it made sense that once CIT started, the few that would become available, CIT officers, right, who had true volunteers and completed the certification, they would be asked, do you want to certify, become and carry a taser? And they could make that choice then to go ahead and be one of those who would receive a taser. So that's a whole different thing than saying any and all officer from 2011 on that wants to carry a taser must what? First complete the CIT 35-hour training and then receive the taser as a weapon training. Because in my experience, and I think it just makes common sense, you have folks who had volunteered for years to be CIT officers and were out there working hard and taking all that on, right, as a volunteer, the extra work. And now suddenly that program it's really what? It's a taser program. I mean, whereas it's no longer what we were dedicating ourselves to on top of all the things officers do in general. And then you have officers who, they want to carry a taser. They don't have an interest in CIT. And they have to sit through 35 hours of training. I can't imagine that makes anybody happy or learning. That's against every learning principle, let alone for police officers, but for adults. What's the complexity? I noticed a little bit of change in the CIT. I think maybe there was some discussion in 2012, and maybe that's what prompted me to get some of this information. I forget. But how open are you going to be? And you want an esprit de corps of the CIT voluntary officers, right? When you have officers who have no interest in being CIT officers in the same class. I'm not going to speak up, right? I mean, I wouldn't be as open and share, and we're part of a group that are really taking this on, like others, whatever anybody else might do as officers on top of their usual duties. So that is a key point. It's much different to say when they were scarce, we gave those true volunteers the opportunity to get those few tasers if they wanted them. But now, since 2011, they're saying you have to sit for CIT. Now, what does that do? We set the CIT officers in the program, and that's what it was rolled out to be into the public, and that's what all the statements have been, that's what it is. When you see that pinned officer, you're getting a volunteer officer who has a personal interest and went through that training and they're here to really help that family or that person. And I'm not saying other officers aren't, but there's a difference, I think, for all of us. Whatever we volunteer to do on top of our job duties, right, as part of our jobs or outside of that or related, that's something we do why. It's a passion, it's a personal interest, and that's the whole model, the CIT model that was adopted. The ramifications are, as we just talked about, we even have to think about liability, really, too, as well. So it's not in the best interest, in my opinion, of police officers, right, who don't want to be CIT officers. It's not in the best interest of the public, I think, who thought that they're getting someone with that deep-seated interest. And we had such an advanced program, and that's really why I'm here, is because I just think it's so important to the use of force, potentially, right? And to those officers who dedicated themselves to be CIT officers, and now it's become something else. I don't know what the reasoning is, but it's, to me, it confounds logic, and it doesn't make any sense. It's contrary. So, again, citizens were told, remember the rollout, call 911. We specially trained 911 radio to know CIT officers where they were and the availability, and people were told, call for CIT. Officers were told, call for CIT. Again, those were those true volunteers out there. So my recommendations back in August 2012 to the Police Commissioner's Liaison and the Police Training Committee meeting, once I had learned it and the meetings had come up, was to take the 6-hour course, which we now know, right, the DOJ, the cops, and PERF, we were on track. It was neat, okay, to hear that. Use that for de-escalation training and make that 6 hours part of your 6 hours for TASER as a weapon training. Make that the package, right? So you get those proven 6 hours, and it's been accepted by the police department as having value to the officers. I mean, and then you return CIT and don't compromise its integrity by taking away that pure volunteer aspect, and then also kind of go back and recertify those earlier officers and let them know that, you know, we're back on track here. You know, your dedication is appreciated, and we want to hopefully get back to that. And then every officer would again have some form of that 6 hour available, right? As they come on after a year on duty or something, and they need a little experience out there after the academy training to, yes, I know what this means now, all right? And again, we learned so much from them and made the training, you know, I think it was of value to all of us and to the citizens, to me in Philadelphia. My daughter was she had an interest in law, Temple law graduate, and sat in on some of the classes here years ago. But you know, I felt the police officers, as I got to know them, they're really helping protect people out there and putting their lives at risk. And here's information. I'm not a police officer, but here's information you can use to be safer and keep us all safer. And that's the whole point of it. And then if they wanted to go for the advanced training, they could get it and feel that, you know, and continue kind of that core group to build on that. So I think going forward, what I would see is I hope we can get back to how that was for all of us. I think it was best for the officers and for the citizens. I think there has to be oversight, because and it has to be kind of third party, not kind of, it has to be third party independent. Because whether it's the police department or Department of Behavioral Health, over the years, you know, things come up and you take things, you have other agendas that come up or other tangents you go off on that may affect a program such as this. And you need somebody to say, hey, that you've been in communication with everybody at the table, because there was really not any communication about this. I don't remember a public announcement. I don't remember an announcement to the folks involved in these training programs, including myself, that this change had been made or was being made. Let's discuss it, right? It was just done. And yet the department does say it's not a police department training program. It's a community partner training program. And that would get us, I hope, back to those true partnerships and that community trust, which will help officers in the community. So that's all I have for today. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Do we have any questions?
What's that?
I have
Yes.
two questions.
Sure.
Then. So one question was, I heard you say something I thought was very interesting. It was all very interesting. But in particular, when you talked about, as part of the CIT training, this notion of time is not of essence.
Yes.
And I think that really resonates, because sometimes we see these explosive situations, and we're kind of wondering, what's the hurry? And so even in the settings where the person that they're trying to arrest or restrain or calm down maybe doesn't rise to the level of being a severely mentally disabled, which to me as a disability lawyer kind of is a very particular thing.
Yeah.
But even if the person isn't that, is there some counter directive that you have to arrest this person right away?
Well, that's the fundamental point of the 6th hour, which was maintain your safety. It may be you do not have to arrest. It may be you can call acute services, a big partner, by the way, in all this, and led the police training committee. You can call mobile crisis. Now, we all know we need more. I think there's only basically one or two on duty, one at night, JFK, those kind of things. And that's a big point. Officers throughout the training and the feedback we would get and return to the system was, they do need more services and more resources out there. We value the training, it's terrific, and the CIT is really helping us get folks where they need to be as an alternative to arrest. You have a new grant that came into Philadelphia. Congratulations to everybody in Philadelphia from the MacArthur Foundation. And that's about trying to get our prison population down like we're trying nationwide. And CIT, really, the first grant that was written, and a big part of CIT is to what? Not have folks arrested who really need services and not be in the jail population, either to jail population's up and it's difficult enough there for the folks who need to be there and for the officers and corrections officers. But CIT, one of the main goals was to reduce the number of arrests, get people into services. Which I think goes to the all-volunteer officer who's very much interested in getting folks not to have to arrest them into the system. And even if they do, to have other
So
options.
there's not a police department directive, and I turn to our former officers about, you got to do this stuff quickly. I mean, this idea of time is not of an essence. That's not kind of different from how it was done before, just bringing some attention to it.
It's kind of like barricaded man situation when people are holed up in a house, whether they're a felon or whatever. Time is on your side. Keep everybody safe. Take your time, and that's the way.
And what I did learn, and maybe you could let me know, what I think I picked up from officers, there is pressure, right, to resolve the situation, obviously.
Sure.
And they do need more officers on the street. We know that as well, and they do. But actually slowing down and taking time, as you just said in your professional experience, can actually get you a resolution maybe even more quickly, and certainly without the officers, anytime use of force, hands-on or anything, officers increase the risk of injury, another goal of CIT to reduce that. So Directive 136 took those things from the CIT before it became CIT and put them in the police, well, the police department agreed in the policy, which was, do your job as police officers, please protect ourselves, protect yourselves. But just know that maybe the best course of action is step back, slow it down, and you get a resolution where you're safer, and the person that is connected with services and doesn't come back around again or as often, and they're well, and you're not called back to that scene.
Great.
Does that make sense in your experience, sir?
Thank you. So my other point is actually a request. I tried to capture your recommendation as quickly as I could, as quickly as you said it.
Oh, that's what my daughter said. She told me to slow down.
But if you would be kind enough to
will.
submit to us the exact language of your recommendation, I think that would be helpful.
I can do that. Right, that was one of my, that's why all this, I used that PowerPoint presentation, I've done it for years. There's that background that's needed, but get to the heart of it, which is that recommendation. I can get that out to you for sure. To Calvin's attention, he can get it to the board. All right, absolutely. Yes.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you for
All
coming
right,
back
thank
and
you.
share this with
All right.
us this evening.
All right, so we'll let you get to your work. All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Kind of recalls one of the first events we were, when at least Chuck and I became commissioners, when they tasered the guy in the outfield at the Phillies game, and I was like, what's the hurry? I mean, you know, how many laps is he gonna do out there? And I thought that seemed excessive at that time.
Yeah, in the training that we were just in Las Vegas, it was interesting because the presenter was talking about a situation in Camden where you actually watched the video that went on for probably 25 minutes or so of a group of officers essentially trying to corral a gentleman who was clearly, you know, suffering from some type of mental illness. But they couldn't tase him because it was winter time, he had a thick jacket on, etc. And it was interesting to watch the reaction of the officers in the group. There is an impatience that seems to be embedded in some folks, and there's, oh, I wouldn't let this go. And it was interesting, I was actually listening to the reaction more than I was watching the video, because there's an extreme impatience that says, oh, well, we got to bring this situation to an end. And so I said to him, well, what's the problem? Well, you know, there's other stuff going on, there's more important things. So I think that's in some ways built into parts of law enforcement that you kind of have to push back against sometimes. So.
It's interesting. Well, thank you for inviting the gentleman, and I think that helped. That background was certainly helpful.
Good.
So I don't have a report. I think we're still moving along. We're waiting to see what happens with the administration in terms of new members and budgets and location and all good things. So we will continue to be patient.
Very good. Well, to that end, I should pick up by saying I did have a meeting with Judge Ben Lerner between our last meeting and today, which was very good. It's my understanding that there are discussions going on above our station about what's going to happen with the commission and the Police Community Oversight Board, how the administration may put those two functions together in some way, or empower both the commission and PCOB, but there's no specifics out there yet. They're still talking about that, but I think soon we're going to hear some type of conclusion.
I hope they will take some guidance from you and the staff.
Well, they've been listening. We'll see.
It's a good start. Listening is always good.
Yes.
Almost as good as doing, but it's better than nothing.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
So, I think what I'll do, since we've just heard quite a bit on the CIT program, I'm going to skip to the third bullet point in my report that talks about taser usage and the PPD. I wanted to offer this up to you as a kind of background on where we are now with usage of the weapon. What we started to look at was the last 5 years of taser usage, and you can see in the graph that I provided you that it's actually on the decline. We had almost 500 taser usages in 2011, and that's declined significantly to only 300 or so this past year. The smaller side of the graph is the ineffective uses of the taser. All uses of force are characterized in the department by being either effective or ineffective. So in the instance of the taser, we can see over the last 5 years that basically 80% of the time the taser is used effectively, and roughly 20% of the time the taser is ineffective. Now, obviously, there are subtleties to both of those, but in terms of trying to figure out how the weapon is being used in the department, this is actually a good beginning. By comparison, on the next page, you'll see Los Angeles statistics are considerably worse. Los Angeles, over the last 5 years, has taser effectiveness between 53% and 65%. So clearly they're having a lot more trouble with the weapon than we appear to be having here. I've seen some data from a couple of other departments that suggest the numbers we see here in Philadelphia are probably about what we see around the country. That is, tasers are effective maybe 8 out of 10 times. Those other 2 times we have other sorts of problems. As I've just described, sometimes the weapon doesn't work if someone has thick clothing on, et cetera. So that is the beginning of what we hope is going to be a deeper dive into taser usage. One of the things we're trying to figure out is what exactly does the department collect around tasers and the use of the weapon. Whenever you fire the taser, the weapon itself collects a tremendous amount of information, how far I am from the subject. Some of them even have cameras on them so you can tell the angle that the weapon was fired at, etc. So that's something else that we need to look at in terms of also who's getting tased. We don't know that as well. But just wanted to give you a sort of a snapshot of where we are in the department with that. One of the reasons taser usage is declining, and this came up also in the training we went to in Las Vegas, is that since 2010, taser has changed the protocols for what's actually safe in terms of use of the weapon. You can't tase people center mass anymore. You certainly can't tase pregnant women, people over and under certain ages. So with all of those various changes to the protocols by the manufacturer, I think nationally we've actually seen a pretty steady decrease in use of the weapons since it was first introduced.
Do you know if the number of tasers across the 5 years is constant? I'm thinking we're looking at about a 40% decline in the overall numbers in that 5-year period, but are the same number of tasers
That's
in the
another
hands of
That's
officers?
a good
If that's-
question. We'll find out. Yep.
I'm wondering what the discharge per weapon rate would look like year over year.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Jumping back up top, we're at 9 complaints so far this year. That's a little more than last year. We had 6 in April of 2015. We have 37 open investigations. We added 2 new complaints that just came in to our list of full investigations. Internal Affairs got 40 complaints so far this month. They're a little bit over where they were last year at this time. Total of 204 complaints. In the audit column, we have 146 complaints. We've added a couple of complaints to do with taser usage, actually, too. On the Shalek case, of course, we heard a lot from Ms. Vanessa Shalek at last month's meeting. Commissioner Small has kindly done a very detailed analysis of the case, which I'm going to circulate to everyone, and we can put our heads back together and decide how we want to go back to Internal Affairs with our recommendations on that case. I also am going to try to bring in the new head of the Special Victims Unit to address us generally about how that unit works and to answer some of our questions about how we might try to improve what they do.
Well, clearly, they've got to do something different than they did in the shower.
Absolutely.
Clear.
In terms of our annual report, we're almost at the end of that. We are now reviewing the findings of both citizen and internal complaints from 2014 and 2015, and we've completed the bulk of the rest of the report. I'm holding on to it now primarily because of a number of the discussions council and I are having with the city solicitor's office about what type of information they believe should be public. In our discussions around both the arbitration records and now this particular public records request, it's become evident that there may be some significant differences in what the solicitor's office and the police department believes should be public and what we believe should be public. I think we need to get some clarity on that before we begin to issue our public reports. And I certainly don't want to disappoint the public by reporting less than we can, but at the same time, we want to be mindful and consider what some of the police department and the law department's arguments are around certain types of information that we want to make public.
Can you or BB speak to the idea of, that I thought that there was an agreed upon universe of information that you could have access to? I didn't realize, I guess, that within that universe, there are further limits on what can be disclosed?
Well,
You go, Ben.
okay, and I would just say,
I'll pipe in here.
right, these are public record requests under the Pennsylvania Right to Know law. And the Right to Know law, it says in the statute, I mean, it doesn't use these words, but it says that the Right to Know law creates a floor and not a ceiling on what must be publicly disclosed. And with certain exceptions that really aren't relevant here, like things that are protected by attorney-client privilege and a couple other things like that, a public agency is free to disclose things that it doesn't have to disclose under the Right to Know law. So the Right to Know law only places a substantive limit on what must be disclosed in response to a public records request. It doesn't limit what the agency can choose to disclose.
There are exceptions.
Right.
You know,
Attorney-client
under
privilege,
Under the
a couple others.
statute, if there's a federal law or regulation that's implicated, privilege and some other exceptions. The Right to Know law itself has exceptions for the subject of a criminal investigation or a non-criminal investigation. The city's concern in the citizen's complaint request was that we would be turning over all of the information from, let's say, what could be a criminal investigation, but let's say for our purposes, non-criminal investigation. And so the city has great concern about that because it wouldn't. So if the request goes to the city, the asking is for our documents, but our documents originate as a result of an investigation, it's their position that under section 708 B17, they will not produce it. So, but that then gave us additional concerns, which is if the city's not producing that in response to a right to know request, should we be producing things generally that would not be produced upon that review? And I think at the very
Say that
least-
again, should we
Okay.
not be?
So let's say Kelvin decides, without speaking to the city, to publish something in our annual report. But that same subject matter, the city would not be willing to give out had it received a right to know request. On one of the bases I just said, maybe it's a criminal investigation, maybe it's a non-criminal investigation, maybe they cite another section. But because of that, we have some concerns in that regard that we don't want to be giving out what the city would not give out on a right to know. So we just at least want to have some understanding if they object and what the basis is and you know what our right to produce would be. As a second matter, Kelvin might get a request from a citizen, let's say, for a report. And that report might include the Internal Affairs Division report, because our records would include some police records as a result of our investigation. And maybe the police would not be willing to give out that Internal Affairs report for one reason or another, or they would expect someone to follow protocol and show up at the Internal Affairs Division and make the request by complainant name or by officer name, and then receive that one report. So we're also concerned that we at least have a protocol so that someone can't come to the Police Advisory Commission specifically to get a document that he or she might not be able to get from the police department. So we don't want to be like a backdoor that way.
Sure.
At the same time, we're in favor of transparency, and so we just want to make sure that we balance our interest in transparency and disclosing with the city's concerns about the right to know law and security.
I guess my concern is, and I'm not sure how it quite fits in here, but this idea that, so if we collect information that then can't be shared, what is it that we're telling the citizens about any particular issue? Like,
Our information.
trust us, this is right, you know,
No, no,
these
no.
are the numbers? That doesn't feel exactly right.
Our information would be available. So to the extent that, I mean, Calvin, maybe you can address it in terms of what you did produce recently, that we have no concern about whatsoever.
Well, I think, for example, even in the report that I've done here today, much of the information that I have on tasers, for example, comes out of my access to the police department's database. But what I'm doing there is I'm going in, looking at general information, it's not officer specific or complainant specific, pulling some of that out and then offering that up into the report to you guys and to the public. I don't think the department or the solicitor's office necessarily has a problem with that. I think more specifically, the providing of a specific internal affairs report that names an officer, that names a complainant would be a different matter. We're not simply offering up our perspective or our analysis of a body of data, but some very specific records that come from a specific file.
But would that level of information be within one of the exceptions? You know, the officer name or names of complaining witnesses or other involved parties?
So it can be an exception if the city has concerns, like in some cases, you redact because the city has concerns about security, let's say, of the officer's family or that the officer's address not be published. So, you know, depending again on what the concern is in this particular case, a record might be redacted. In the case of the investigations, the city will not produce it. They'll give, Kelvin can produce data in terms of the number of citizens' complaints, what happened in each, whether it was founded, whether it was unfounded, whether it was a full investigation, whether it was an audit, and they'll produce that. But their concern is not giving individual records of investigation. But now that we've started along this path, and we're dealing with them on these issues and these exceptions, it's raised other concerns that we have in terms of general productions. So on the one instance, if a citizen comes to us because we've done an investigation and they ask for their own investigation report, they can have it. But there's a concern that accompanies that as to whether we should be giving the internal affairs component of that report if internal affairs has not given it out itself, and there are procedures to follow for that same citizen to get the internal affairs component, right? Whether we're doing something which would not be our motivation, but whether someone could get it from us and maybe not get it from the police department. So that raised some concerns.
But I have this feeling that one of the things that we were hoping to accomplish with Kelvin's data savvy ways is that the PAC could be a conduit of information that the average citizen couldn't get because they didn't know how to get it. And so we're kind of expediting access to information that they're entitled to.
And I guess there are two separate issues that it's helpful to think of differently. One is sort of what must we produce if somebody files a right to know request, and that's question one. Question two is, to what extent are we comfortable producing stuff anyway that others in city government don't want us to produce?
Right, right.
And the second question is a political question, not a legal question.
I think that's right, and I thought that was kind of the direction that we were talking about heading to as we were looking at the capabilities of the PAC and what's the real value of this commission to the citizens. So that's exactly right. Now, I don't think we're talking about things that there may be some legitimate concerns about safety of witness names and certainly witness addresses and even officer addresses. I mean, I think that feels kind of unfair and off limits. But I don't know that we want to be in the position, and I know that you're not suggesting this, but just as a starting point, that we want to be in the position of kind of censoring the information that we're giving out.
Censoring is probably the wrong word.
Fair enough.
But I think we probably have to at least have a protocol for what we produce and some thinking about it to be consistent, right? So if our goal is to produce as much as possible, that's fine. But I just think we need to do the thinking also because there are these nuances and these issues now that are coming up with the right to know law, and where I can tell you that the city is not going to give our actual, they will give our statistics on the citizens' complaints, but they will not, they are unwilling to produce the actual complaints themselves and the processes, because it is their position that under that section 17, that is an exception. And while Ben said it's a floor, it's a bear, but they're looking at it more as a ceiling. So yes, we can adopt thinking that looks at it as a floor, but at the same time, we have to be concerned that we're not giving out documents which are objectionable and would not be turned over on the right to know request.
If we decide that we don't want to do that, isn't that the other piece of it? Suppose for the sake of discussion, we certainly haven't had this detailed of a conversation on this, but suppose for the sake of discussion, we say, if we have it, and with the exception of certain standards that we could, come up with, we have it, we're sharing it.
Right, I think it's just a question of coming up with those standards, so everybody is comfortable with that decision. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do, and so I'm wondering if we can, and not necessarily at this meeting, at this moment, because I don't know that we're prepared for it, but I think it's a conversation we need to have, as a commission, like what is our standard on making this information available? And I know that there are many factors in that, the more we share, are we likely to receive less, that type of thing. But I also don't want us, it would be unfortunate, I think, if the PAC was yet another entity that was turning citizens away from getting information that they can't figure out how to get.
I agree, but my suggestion would be maybe to have a subcommittee appointed to this issue, and maybe to come back and report to the board at the next meeting. Because we haven't even gotten to the issue of the Grove decision. I guess I should raise it now because there is a decision that was handed down by the Commonwealth Court. And I guess Ben raised the
I
issue
mentioned this issue at our last meeting.
of whether PAC should file an amicus brief. The city has taken the position that it has to vet that issue first, and that we need to consider.
That's the issue, which issue, of whether we can file an amicus?
What the city's position is.
And just to remind folks, this is the case that was a right to know request filed against the Pennsylvania State Police. Somebody was seeking dash cam videos, and she got pulled over and then wanted to challenge the officer's actions.
So the state police first said, oh, you can't have it because there's a Criminal History Records Information Act bar. And the court looked at that and said, no, these are minor traffic citations, and I'm not going to use the Criminal History Record Information Act. Then there was the issue of, is this a wiretap violation if the records are disclosed? Well, first of all, audio is subject to the wiretap statute, but video is not subject to the wiretap statute. And the court said, as to the video, that can be produced. There's no wiretap, exemption that I see. As to the audio, it can be released as to the police because they were on notice of the audio. But as to the audio for private citizens who may have been overheard, I'm going to remand it, and you go back and figure out, did these citizens know about it? Is this something that can be produced vis-a-vis the citizens? That was a Commonwealth Court decision. So now, the Pennsylvania State Police will appeal that. The requester, who prevailed in Commonwealth Court, will brief it. And an amicus brief, if filed, would be by, I think, May 25th?
Something like that. So the state police brief is due on Friday.
So when the issue first arose, we raised it at the same meeting, and the city took the position, look, we don't even know what our position is yet, but we may be opposed to that, and we want to vet this, and we want to talk about security reasons, and, and we can't just vet it here. This has to go above us, and it's going to take us some time. So they asked if we would wait to hear their input, at least preliminarily, and I said we would, but even if we needed to convene a special phone call, but we needed to hear from them before May 25th.
Well, if we're going to be filing a brief,
We
I
need
mean, certainly
more
before
time
May
for that.
25th.
Yeah, well,
And if they didn't already file a brief last Friday, it's too late for them to file a brief supporting the PSP position.
but maybe they have great confidence in it. No, I don't know. I mean, I really don't know their position yet. I suspect what their position will be, but I don't know yet.
What do you suspect their position, because you can't?
I suspect that their position is going to be that they're not in favor of the requester's position for security reasons.
All right, all
But
right.
that doesn't impact our ability.
Our ability.
Well, it
Are they
may.
afraid that the Police Advisory Commission is going to file a brief contrary to the city's position?
That's part of it. And then does the Philadelphia Home Charter Rule come into effect? Is that a conflict?
Well, if we could just step back 1 second, we do have the authority to do that. Whether we want to do that or the capacity is a different thing, but we do have the authority to do that.
I mean, but do they dispute that we have the authority to do that? Is there some
I
question
think
about that?
I think there could be, I think we should discuss it further at a future meeting, but I think they could take the position under the Philadelphia Home Charter Rule that as another agency, if the solicitor's office decides that it doesn't want an amicus brief filed because it is, let's say it supports the, I mean, they did not file an amicus brief, but let's say it supports the state police position, query whether they won't object or raise an issue under the Home Charter Rule. So this is all new to me.
Right. And I
This
guess I
began
don't.
with the discussions with the city solicitor's office. Well,
I'm a little lost even procedurally, like where would that happen? So they who have not filed arguably don't have any standing.
Right.
So
So what would happen if we, I mean, if we wanted to, and I'm asking because I don't know the answer, if we chose that we wanted to file an amicus brief in support of the requester's position, I don't know if that's even so, and if we say we had the capacity to do that in the next 4 weeks, I mean, would we just file it? Would we, would the city solicitor's office expect that we would first give them a draft of the brief, or first,
well,
I mean, what
what
would
Kelvin
happen?
and I wanted to know, in all seriousness, were what the concerns were. Because if there are valid security concerns, I think, you know, the group would want to discuss it. I think the commissioners would want to know what the concerns were to discuss and vet that issue among the commissioners. So that's how it started. And we asked that if there were concerns about security, to please share it with us so that we could take it to the commissioners and the commissioners could discuss that. And that's where it started. And now it's evolving into a different discussion.
So I guess one of the concerns is that if they take too much time, some loosely defined too much time, then the ability, our ability to file a brief, that question becomes moot, not because we see that we don't have the authority, but that, you know, even with Ben's brilliance, we're not cranking something out in 2 days.
Oh, Ben, you could.
So I guess that there's a couple of pieces and maybe some timelines. So I think that absolutely we are a little bit ahead of ourselves of trying to establish our right to do a thing that we don't even know we want to do.
Correct. So I didn't start at, do we have the right? Kelvin and I assumed we have the right. What we wanted to know is, what are your substantive reasons if you oppose it? Please tell us, because we want the commissioners to be aware of that and to be able to discuss it. That was the discussion. That was the only discussion.
So maybe we should have the request back that if there's something you want us to know that's so important that you need to tell us by this time, because we are reserving the right to file this brief that we haven't decided that we want to write. But we still, I mean, it's a scenario that turns out that we feel like it's an important thing to do, but that they pause for so long it becomes impossible to do. That doesn't feel right to anyone. I assume that doesn't feel right to anyone.
You know what I don't understand about all this? You just have to go on YouTube and you can see thousands of police officers in different scenarios. I don't know where the security aspect comes into play. I mean, it seems like the cat's out of the bag, you know. don't know how they would.
Well, that was the question. If there is it's hard to see what that concern is. So it's
Yeah.
like, okay, if there's a concern, share it, tell us. Let us discuss it.
Yeah, I can't imagine, to tell you the truth. I mean, they have these shows on YouTube where, I mean, there were some pretty horrific incidents where officers were involved in shootings or shootouts. But they're out there, and, I mean, maybe they could be a risk.
Right, and even if
of
it's just a
retaliation.
case-specific concern, right? Let's say there's an arrest made in that case, and there's a pending prosecution. If that's the concern, share it.
Yeah.
But what I wanted was for someone to articulate to the
Right.
commissioners, so you could make a well-reasoned decision, what the concerns were, if there are any. Because they really were non-committal about saying yay, nay, or anything, and all they really committed to do was let us know what their position is.
I wonder if they're concerned, and I'm just speculating here, but about, inadvertently recorded things that the police officer's body cam is recording when he's, chatting with his colleagues about a case they're investigating or something, and, names of undercover agents or confidential informants or something like that, and then that video and audio becomes subject to release as a public record. I wonder if that's the sort of concern they have, or like a public figure, like a Sixers player or somebody gets arrested, and the TV stations want to get all the footage of the police officers in that interaction. That they're concerned that could be.
Right, but then speak to counsel for the state police and articulate it,
So maybe we need to respectfully request that you go back and say, we're interested in moving forward, but we can't even really have the conversation. Let me think about that for a second. So, do we need, if we don't need permission to do that, what would we be asking BB to ask them for? And as I think this through, I'm thinking it's a bit of a bad setup, because if we respectfully request that BB go back and ask for more, and then they say no, and we say, well, you know what, we're gonna do it anyway? I mean, so I'm not sure we want to ask for something.
Easier to ask.
I've just
Forgiveness and permission.
I've asked for basic information. Information that they want the commissioners to discuss among themselves before making a decision. That's what I've asked for.
The conversation that we just had about the annual report centered around transparency and open access to information, and I think that that's an important default that we should stick to. Given that, my reaction is to think we should default to filing that brief unless given reasons otherwise. And I don't know that approaching and saying, we intend on filing unless you have compelling reasons otherwise is strategically the best suggestion going forward.
I agree.
But-
I mean, I started to say it, then I thought, well, wait a second, I don't really like that idea.
Yeah, nor do I.
No,
I
you
think
guys
we
are
should-
reasonable
I think
people.
we should,
You-
yeah, I
you
think
know,
we should
but-
tell the city we're doing it. Period.
Or not even, or just do it.
Just,
Yeah.
Well-
you know what, yeah.
I mean, this is posted, so they'll know, but.
Well, I think, I'm not suggesting like a blackmailer, like we'll do this or else, but saying because of our interest in transparency, we would typically think we would like to support this kind of request unless there are valid security reasons. I mean, that's fundamentally what this discussion is about, right?
Right, but
Well,
I think.
the discussion is what are the reasons? What are the reasons why that would not militate in favor of?
And just
Share it.
getting back to
That
the
is,
merits
let
of-
us know your
right.
position, share it with us, and do
Yes.
it in a timely way.
I don't think that, and also just, I don't think that it's an all or nothing proposition in Grove. I think that, one outcome is none of these are ever available, another outcome is all of them are always available, but I think a more plausible outcome is something in the middle that under the situations of Grove, it's available, but under some other situations, there may be other factors to consider. And,
Yeah, there'll be
we have
another
to-
52 decisions
Right, but we were.
cutting up the
Correct.
baby.
Correct, because the decision where there's some confidential informant concern, that's not going to be disclosed.
Right.
And, the case where there's something on there that is protected information that's not going to be disclosed or will be redacted, right?
And I would think one of the
see-
factors would be, you know, the public's interest in it, and
And I
you
can
know,
see
and if
camera
it's-
redactions.
right, and if you know, there's an allegation of, you know, the police, you know, beat up an innocent bystander or something like that, then there's a strong public interest in seeing that video. And I would think that, you know, something, if we wanted to proceed, we would have to all talk about, you know, what are the appropriate factors that we would advocate be considered in making a decision to release. But
Right, because we're not, even if the decision is to release, they're not going to just blanketly release video without screening it first. And so if there's something that's differently objectionable, that would be the basis to hold it, which makes sense, right? We're not saying an absolute, we get all video all the time
Right,
on
and
demand.
don't forget there's the citizen issue too, because the citizen's not on notice. So arguably it implicates privacy rights of citizens, the audio recordings, and that wasn't decided, that was remanded. So I mean, there are, but, you know, I think along the lines of the documents, I think probably you should appoint a small subcommittee and we can report back.
I have also just a fact.
And I think Ben
factual-
should be on the subcommittee. Absolutely.
Also, just a quick factual question, maybe the former officer. I mean, how common are dash cams in the Philadelphia Police Department? Are they they don't exist at all, or they?
I don't know, they have dash cam, they have body cams
Right.
now, you can use it.
We didn't have any that I'm aware of.
Yeah, and I don't know how common it is now. I mean, you're still in the process of buying more. I know it you know, develops other problems too, like with the storage, and, you know, they
Right.
consider it evidence, so they have to have policies in place. I know that's a big issue with this. And then the volume of video that's gonna, you know, be more and more as they get more body cameras out there, so it is a real big headache for them. And then if you add in, you know, requests to obtain a video, I mean, administratively, it's even more issue. Just from the administrative side, because now they have to have somebody there, take it out, look at it, maybe redact it if there's legitimate concerns.
I think that's actually one of the bigger issues for all municipalities now, that everybody's faced with tons of body cam footage from all these cameras. People are very hesitant. Police departments do not want to, police departments are going to have to spend a lot of money building a unit to do nothing but this. Even with the, if you think about just with the body cams we have now, we're talking like 1 gig per officer per shift. Tons of information that needs to be looked through, decided upon, and I think there's a tendency in most state legislatures now to keep this stuff away from the public as far as we can. We've been sold body cameras as this big thing for transparency, and now all we're seeing is most states are pushing back against that. That's what this is.
So why don't we, at the end of this meeting, kind of have a quick chat about following up on BB's suggestion of a smaller subcommittee that we can look at some of these issues quickly and kind of give us some guidance to talk through this with the idea of both we want to get the information for the annual report, but also if we're going to move forward with this brief, we don't want to hamstring ourselves by taking longer just to decide to do it. Okay? Okay. All right.
Now, my friend Deacon Smith has been very patient back there. I know that he has a question for the commission. Won't you come on up and ask your question?
Good evening.
Good evening. Hello.
I'm Matthew Smith, the National Action Network Civil Rights Group located here in Philadelphia, 1046 West Jefferson Street. And one of the things that we're concerned about as a civil rights group, and we had a lot of conversation on it since it was one of the part of the platform that Mayor Kennedy ran on, is this whole stop and frisk issue. We are interested in knowing when is this going to be done away with, because it's going to be a hot issue, and a hotter issue as the time goes on. So we need some answers, since it was a public campaign and it was put out there. that this would be one of the first acts that would be taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Well, I don't think that I can answer that question directly, as that's, a political question, a political stance that obviously Mayor Kenny took during the campaign. However, I think I can address some of the issues that are surrounding that, and are certainly going to be on the table when we discuss stop and frisk at the town hall this upcoming Friday. So, as we all know, the city is frankly in hot water over the issue of pedestrian stops. The ACLU and the city have been in a consent decree for several years now, and we're at a point where almost half of the pedestrian stops done by our officers have been judged to be done without reasonable suspicion. And that's not only the ACLU and plaintiff counsel's position, that's the position that our police inspectors have come to after studying this for some time now. Initially, the problem was said to be, well, the officers aren't filling out the reports correctly. So there was a lot of effort that the department put on training the officers to fill out the 7548A form better, to articulate exactly why these stops were being made. But still, we find ourselves now 6 reports several years later at a point where a large number of the stops still not grounded in reasonable suspicion. And there is, as Deacon Smith noted, a great deal of public discussion around why can't we simply end this practice. One of the things that's happened just in the last couple of days is that on Friday, the police department, as part of the police data initiative, which is also somewhat related to what we're talking about with stop and frisk, released all of the information about police stops from 2014 to the present. We're talking about a little bit under 1 million vehicle stops and pedestrian stops in that time frame. So you can now go onto the police department website, and you can, through the lens of their storyboards that they put together around this data, you can take a look at how and where those stops are taking place in the city. One of the things I've given you just on the last page is a snapshot of 2 things. The first chart shows you all the data that's collected at each vehicle and pedestrian stop. We know the age of the individual, the date and time where it happened, the location, the gender, whether the person was actually arrested, whether they found any contraband, whether the person was frisked. Part of the problem in our discussions around stop and frisk is that the terminology itself is problematic. Not all of the stops, in fact, many of the stops don't have a frisk component to it. You can certainly have reasonable suspicion to stop someone without going to the next level and being able to frisk them. So one of the things we want to do in trying to explain this to the public is be a bit more honest and detailed about what this full universe of activity looks like. So the pedestrian stops, for example, are actually less than the vehicle stops. One of the things that we're going to be dealing with going forward, we've spent the last 5 years, 6 years looking at pedestrian stops. The next thing that I believe the ACLU and other plaintiffs are going to tackle are the vehicle stops. And as you can see, there are actually more vehicle stops than there are pedestrian stops. So we're going to be going through this similar exercise that we've been going through over the last several years with the vehicle stops. So this is not something that's going to go away anytime soon. It's also, one of the things I've started to do too is to take a look at where this is occurring primarily in the city. So on that last page 4, I've listed for you the districts and how they're ranked in terms of all of the vehicle and pedestrian stops. You see, for example, the 24th district is tops with 88,000 some vehicle and pedestrian stops in the city. That probably would come as to no one's surprise, given where that is in the city, the density of the population, the fact that it's a heavily traveled area, so obviously we're going to have lots of stops and frisk and things of that nature there. So then the question becomes, how do we deal with the fact that so many of these stops are not grounded in reasonable suspicion? I would suggest that part of the issue is that unless a judge or a plaintiff's counsel like the ACLU decides to take something like this to court, most of these stops by officers don't come under any judicial scrutiny. So when we actually sit down, when a judge and some lawyers sit down and actually look at these, I don't think it should come to anyone's surprise that a good number of them probably are not going to be up to snuff, particularly with the issues we've had with officers not filling out forms correctly or not articulating exactly why they're making these stops. So one of the things that's been put out there as a potential fix for this is why don't we simply move from reasonable suspicion to make a pedestrian stop to probable cause. That's one of the things that's out there on the table and certainly will be discussed at the town hall on Friday. Now, I do not know of any real concrete studies or anything that would show us that in fact, okay, sure, we can solve our problem by simply moving from reasonable suspicion to probable cause. What does that look like? How does that change the nature of law enforcement? How does that change the conditions on the ground that people are experiencing? Would they experience less constitutional violations? Possibly. Would that also have some other effect on crime on the ground in the city? Because there are other folks who come to the department who place calls for service, who expect the police to do something when something happens in their neighborhood. If I live in the 24th district and I see drug dealing in my neighborhood, I call the police, I expect them to show up and to do something. So we have a very difficult question on our hands in terms of trying to figure out how do we both safeguard civil liberties and constitutional requirements at the same time allowing our officers the latitude that they have under Terry versus Ohio and other legal issues to do the job that we are asking them to do. So that's kind of the basic parameters of what we're looking at, and where we end up is hard to say. Again, one of the things we need to do that we've tried to suggest is, instead of considering all of this information simply at the city level, we need to begin to look at this at a district level. So for example, if I go to the captain's meeting in the 24th district, I should be able to question the captain and his officers on, well, can you show me what vehicle and pedestrian stops you're making in this district? And let's say if I live at 49th in Baltimore, for example, if I go to my 12th district meeting and I ask them that and they tell me stops that they're making in my neighborhood, I'm going to have a much better perspective on that. I'm going to be able to say, oh yeah, I know what occurs at that corner 2 blocks away from me. So there's some justification or not for your officers doing X, Y, Z. I wouldn't know that necessarily for some part of the city that I don't live in. So one of the things we want to see happen is a more detailed discussion at the district level of how these stops are taking place and what is the justification for them. Aside from that, the other thing the police department has begun to do is push the responsibility for this quite properly onto the street level supervisors, your sergeants and your lieutenants who are out there actually over the officers who are doing the stop. So one of the things I would want to see there is if we have officers who are continually making stops without reasonable suspicion, that should be looked at not only by the inspectors who are gathering the data for this purpose, but it should be looked at by the captains and the sergeants in that area, so we can then make some sort of judgment as to Officer Anderson has made too many stops, maybe we need to bring him in and talk to him, maybe we need to actually discipline him in some way. So the department is actually now looking at making sure that that happens and connecting the disciplinary process to officers who are not making proper stops. So we want to see what that looks like. So we want to look very carefully at the cases that are going through internal affairs, whether they be internals or citizens' complaints. And frankly, as we look at this situation and think about solutions, we're probably going to see more internals because of the pressure now to actually drive down this number. So we're going to want to look very carefully again at the cases that are going through internal affairs and the police board of inquiry around this type of activity. So that's in general where we're trying to get to in terms of looking at stop and frisk and where we're going to end up. But again, those questions around whether we need to move from reasonable suspicion to probable cause, I think are going to be addressed certainly in a lot more articulate way than I can by the city solicitor, who's going to be on the panel on Friday, certainly the ACLU, which certainly has a better grounding in this area than I do, will also be taking a position. So I think it's going to be a very interesting discussion.
Thank you, Kelvin. Deacon Smith, we weren't able to answer your specific question, but I hope that was helpful.
Yes, it helps a lot. And we'll get the rest on Friday.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Okay, well, it's certainly not true. I had an excellent conversation with Deputy Commissioner Coulter and also with a couple of the police department folks who went to the meeting at the White House with me on Friday, and the department is jumped in with both feet on the police data initiative. And in fact, the information I was just quoting to you about the posting in the car and vehicle stops was available on Friday, so that when we went to DC, we could say, look, we just published this new giant data set of vehicle and pedestrian stops for people to try and give them a better understanding of exactly the activity that we're doing. Philly remains in the group of 50 or so police departments who are participating in this initiative. Philly is still one of the more important participants. We published a lot of other data in addition to the car and vehicle stops. All of the Part 1 and Part 2 crimes are there. We're at a point now where you can pull down a great deal of information about all of the crimes that happen pretty much in your area, and you can overlay them, for example, as one of the things the department has done to try and contextualize the stop data is you'll see in the maps an overlay of this is where the crime is, this is where we're making vehicle stops, this is where shootings are. And you probably wouldn't be surprised to find out that most of those areas are fairly common. You know, there are 6 or 7 districts in the city where most of that activity occurs. Now, I'm not certain that all of the wonderful contextualizing the department has done is going to necessarily convince anyone that stop and frisk should not go away, for example. However, I think this does raise the bar in terms of the conversations that we're having. And hopefully, again, if we can take that down to a more palatable district level, we can actually get much better citizen participation in this discussion. Because again, I think the citywide data, while interesting to all of us who swim in these waters all the time, doesn't really give the average citizen much to hold on to and to try to understand in terms of what exactly is happening in my area.